Welcome to Authored by Us, a podcast celebrating children's books about characters of color or of different cultural experiences, and the authors who bring these diverse works to life. Each week, we invite you to join us as we turn the pages of these bookshelf gems and hear from their creators who understand that stories of diverse experience truly come to life when authored by us. Here's your host, Zenzi Hodge.
I am so excited to have our guest author who's with us today. Her name is Lisa Martin-Suber. So before I introduce Lisa, let me give you a little backstory. Lisa and I met our first day of class at Florida A&M University. And we were sitting next to each other and looked and said, oh, wow, a new friend. And she asked where I was from. I asked where she was from. I said, I'm from St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. And she said, oh, wow, my family's from Jamaica. And there's an instant connection because you have two Caribbean students sitting in the same class. And from there, we've been friends. And so her first book, she wrote while at FAMU. And the story about her first book is that we printed this book at the Kinko's. Now, some people may not remember what Kinko's is, but Kinko's is a copy center. But Lisa wrote a book of poetry and she wanted to share it. And she did her printing and her production, and she bound her books at Kinko and walked around campus and she sold it. And it may have been humble beginnings for the start of a publishing career and a career as an author, but that experience took us to where she is today. And so today, she is the author of a wonderful children's story titled There's a Bee in My Book Bag, A Tale with Two Sides. So our Author by Us listeners, I am happy to introduce you to our first author for our podcast, my friend, Lisa Martin-Suber. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Hi, Zenzi. What a great introduction and what a fantastic memory. I forgot all about that book of poetry that we went to Kinko's and copied. Wow, great memories.
You know, I think that the way we start telling our stories usually begins very early on. And I'm going to edit that part out because I don't like how that sounded. It sounded a little weird. But
I thought it sounded great. Just flow with it, girl. Just flow.
Yeah, I remember that book of poetry, Lisa. And you began by just writing poems. You had a poem that you wrote in a notebook, and then you wrote another poem in a notebook. And it began as just one poem here and a second poem. And then you came up with a collection. And you didn't just take that collection and put it in a drawer. You decided, no, I want people to see this collection of poetry. What took you to that point?
You know, you are making me sound like so amazing and fearless. But you know what it was? It was just that time when you're in college and everything is so important and urgent and you've got to get your message across. And, you know, my poems were what I thought were like revolutionary and were just about revolution and change and, you know, our standing in the world as I saw it. And I just really wanted to share my feelings on that. And that was the best way for me to do it.
Well, you sparked something. And I know it sparked something for me, seeing someone at that age decide to move forward with intention on their creativity. And that's kind of why we're here. We're spending our time talking with authors who started with creativity and moved with intention to bring their books to life.
Wow.
And that's why we have people like you joining us on our show. It's about creativity meeting intention and bringing those books to life, which is what you did with first your book of poetry and now with There's a Bee in My Book Bag.
Wow. You know, I really didn't see it that way until you said it. But yeah, I guess that's what I did. I had a thought. Actually, I had an experience which led to a thought, which led to me writing it down and then publishing it and sharing it with friends and family. And now it's, you know, available for the world to see if they so were inclined.
So let's talk about your book. Talk to us about there's a bee in my book bag. And I'm going to tell you, the minute I saw the cover and the title, all I'm thinking is about being attacked by a bee. So I instantly started to panic and I wanted to know if someone had an EpiPen. So tell us about this book, Lisa.
That is so funny. So the book actually was born from an experience. So as a teacher without a homeroom, I was the gifted teacher at my school at the time. And so teachers who don't have homerooms have something called duty, which ask any teacher, we just love duty. It's just, a wonderful part of the job. But anyway, so my duty for that particular year was standing outside, rain, sun, sleet, hail, and greeting the car riders as they got out of their cars and, just wishing them a good day and so on and, keeping the car line moving. So one baby girl got out of her car, got out of the back seat, and she was swatting a bee, like a bee actually flew, toward her. I don't know if it really came out of her book bag, but it kind of appeared that it had. And so in that moment, I thought, I'm going to write a story about a bee in a book bag, and just the misconception, like you said, that the bee is not on the attack. The bee is not some, agent sent to, attack this baby girl, but the bee just got lost. And so I wanted to tell the story from the baby girl's perspective as well as the bee's perspective.
Now, I know our listeners, our readers cannot see the cover as you're talking about it, but Lisa is describing this frenzied image of a child swatting at a bee. And on the cover, there is this image of this child who looks in complete horror at the sight of this bee, who I think has not just jumped out of the book bag, but I think the bee has jumped off of the cover altogether. And so it gives you this image of fright and frenzy, but a great deal of comedy, because she isn't running away, but she's like, something is a little off, and something flew out of my book bag, and what is it? So what inspired you to write this? How did you determine these characters, and are they based on any particular people that you know?
They are based on the actual story. Besides the young lady getting out of her car with the bee, it's also based on my years of teaching kids. And every single time I took them out for recess, there would be like just a group of boys, no matter what year it was, no matter what grade level it was, like they would always chase the bugs, right? They would always try to step on the ants or smush the worms or whatever, right? And I would say, guys, we are outside for recess. We are in the bugs territory. Why are you out here trying to smash these ants and squish these worms? Because this is their home that we are enjoying for our 30 minutes of recess. Stop coming out here trying to kill these bugs. So that's really where the story came from. I just wanted to tell the story from the bee's perspective, just to let the kids know, like, the bugs aren't here to harm you. They're just going about their day. And so I started with the idea of telling my students, like, what if that mosquito or what if that ant was just going from point A to point B? What if his family's waiting for him to get home? Like, I just made up like this whole story, and my kids loved it. They just thought it was so funny. So then they started bringing me bugs. Like, what about this worm? Tell us a story about this worm. And so it just kind of went from there. But honestly, there's just a place in my heart for critters. And I just wanted to write something on their behalf.
So this was your ode to the critter community.
My love of bugs. Yes, I'm a bug lover.
I am sure there's a parent out there right now that sees a mosquito. So growing up in the Caribbean, we always have mosquitoes. So there's a parent out here right now trying to swat a mosquito, and the child is saying, Mom, no, that mosquito is probably on its way to pick up its children from camp. Let it go.
There you go. Let it go. Swat it, but don't kill it,
So, I don't know. So a different perspective. So we see the young lady, and the bee has appeared to come out of her book bag, and she's a little frenzied. So you said it's a tale with two sides. So I'm guessing that if that's the one side with the young lady with the bee in her book bag, is the second side from the perspective of the bee.
Yes. So the bee was just minding its own business, and it ended up in her book bag. I won't say how, just in case anybody wants to read the book. But then it ends up in her book bag. She zips it up before the bee can even escape. And then the bee is having all of these experiences inside of this dark, scary place, which is the book bag. So you can imagine he's pretty scared. He has no idea what's going on. And so when the book bag finally unzips and he zips out, he's like, hey, everybody, here I am. Let me tell you this funny story about what happened to me. And the kids are not having it because by the time the bee is unzipped, he's now in the girls' classroom. And so none of the kids are very excited to see him. And he is just trying to tell his story, and nobody really wants to hear it.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll hear more from our author, Lisa Martin-Suber.
Have a safe and happy new year from Authored by Us and your host, Zenzi Hodge. Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. Authored by Us is made possible by listeners like you. We thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So when I read the book, Lisa, initially I started at the very beginning, and I came in with my notions about how I would feel about this. There's a bee in my book bag. Squash it. That's exactly what I thought.
No.
And as I moved through the pages and I read her perspective, it made sense to me. And then I got to the second half of the tale, and I started to empathize with the bee. And I thought about, here's this bee. I'm going into a new place. And it's sort of like being a new student, and you go into a new classroom and you come out to make friends, and you're trying to talk to people. And wait a minute, people are not happy to see you. And by the end of the story, I did start to feel sorry for the bee.
Thank you.
I wasn't trying to swat it anymore. I gained a great appreciation for it. I wanted the bee to make some friends. I also found myself wondering, what happened to the bee after? Because it kind of left us hanging. So we don't know where the bee went after. So is there more to this story? Do we see a part 2? Is the bee going home after he left the book bag? What's going on with these characters after?
Well, that's a great idea. I don't really have a part 2 to the story, but I do have other ideas about other books, about other bugs. So for example, there's a worm in my watermelon, or there's a bug in my bathtub, which is really cute. I just gotta finish that one. But there's a bug in my bathtub. Like, I just have a great vision for that story. But so no, I don't have a part 2 for the bee book, but I do have other bugs that I want to, just give justice to.
As we're writing our books, there's so much that we want to convey. Oh wow, I think this is a really good idea. Let me put that down. And as you're reading the book, it doesn't always flow as you thought that it would. So as you were putting together There's a Bee in My Book Bag, were there things that you found that you needed to edit out of the story?
Not so much. I wanted to make sure that the cadence was right, like the rhythm of it was right. So I may have had to, snip a word or two here or there. But I think for the most part, what is on the page and in the book is exactly what I wanted. And then, being a teacher, I included that last little page on the back that just gave ideas for students to research if they wanted to learn more about books or bugs. So I think for all intents and purposes, I got pretty much what I wanted this time around.
Yeah, I thought at the very end where you gave information, where there was teaching at the end of the book, I find that to be extremely important. As we write books for children, there needs to be discussion. We want something to come after, because we've engaged them and captivated them with this story. But now, where do we go with that? What do we do? And how do we allow them to make this book and this story a part of their lives? So talk to us about how you how you integrated that, and not just in the book, but how do you see that being integrated in classrooms, whether with your current students or from other readers who have the book and have shared it with students?
Well, I think as a teacher, I kind of just had to have that element of, here are some things you can research. Here are some projects you can do once you've finished reading the book, because I know that there's so many kids out there who have just such a hunger for information, and so for teachers and for parents who may not necessarily be able to provide that guidance of, okay, here's what you can do next. I wanted to have that piece in the book. And then in terms of the actual book itself, because I know that writing can be kind of a tough process for some students, I wanted a teacher to have the option of, okay, let's just read the girl's perspective, and then you go ahead and write the bee's perspective, and then I will come back and read the bee's perspective to you, and we'll see if they match up, or let's see if your perspective was different or funnier or more serious. So I think there's a lot that can be done with the book. And as a teacher, I wanted to make sure that I provided those opportunities for it to be teachable, just because I know that sometimes we struggle with coming up with lesson plans. And I feel like this book already has a lesson built into it.
Now, Lisa, tell us where we can find your book. I know that you have physical copies printed and available, but where can we find your book, and what other formats would your book be available in?
Great question. So the book is currently available on Amazon, and there is a paper format as well as a Kindle format. And then I actually use lulu.com to publish the book. So it's also available on lulu.com. But I think for most people, Amazon is just like the go-to marketplace to find the book.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll hear more from our author, Lisa Martin-Suber.
Are you looking for a fun and interactive way to connect with your loved ones in this virtual environment? If so, look no farther. Personalized Paintings offers virtual paint parties, complete paint kits, and sketch canvases. You provide the people, we'll provide all the supplies that are needed. We also give step-by-step instructions, so no experience is needed. Visit our website today at www.personalizedpaintings.net for more information. That website again is www.personalizedpaintings.net. We cannot wait to create memories with you.
You're listening to Authored by Us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review so you never miss an episode. Now back to the show with your host, Zenzi Hodge.
In your book, your character on the cover has these beautiful Afro puffs.
Intentional, totally intentional.
And as a reader, you read and you create pictures in your mind. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm reading, I'm creating pictures in the mind, and I have Afro puffs as a little kid, that's what I'm seeing. And so if I see a character who has Afro puffs on the cover, I'm like, oh, wow. That could definitely be me. And I think for children, that's extremely important to be able to see themselves on the pages.
I agree. I had to have those Afro puffs. I absolutely had to have them. I had to have a child with glasses because I've been wearing glasses since I was a kid. I had to have a child in a wheelchair because I've had students in my class who have been wheelchair bound. And so that representation absolutely matters. Absolutely. Yeah, and I had to have a Black male teacher, too. If you notice that was also intentional. That Black male teacher in the book, totally intentional.
It absolutely is, Lisa. I think we remember what it was like growing up as kids in school, and you're girls, and you see a girl teacher, and you're like, yay, it's a girl, right? But we both have sons. And so now as our sons go through school, what are you thinking? He's looking for a teacher who looks like him. And that's extremely important for them when they see that, oh, wait a minute, there's a teacher who looks like me. And so having that Black male teacher as a science teacher in your class, I think that was very important.
Yeah, just being able to see yourself in
just not even superhero form, but just an everyday form. You know what I mean? A teacher, a doctor, everyday heroes. You need to be able to see yourself in those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm the daughter of teachers, so I can't say enough about teachers being superheroes. So
yeah, we kind of are. We kind of are.
absolutely. So Lisa, what book had the most impact on you as a child?
There's one book in particular, even to this day, it just brings up such emotion. The Velveteen Rabbit. I love that book. I don't even know how old I was. I must have been relatively young. I'm pretty sure it was elementary school. But that story has just stayed with me through decades. I really love that book. Now, I was a voracious reader. I'm sure there are other books that I really, really enjoyed. Oh, Ferdinand, the story of Ferdinand the Bull, I also loved. But the Velveteen Rabbit, I just love that story.
Amazing that you really recalled books that were based on animals. And look at what your first book is.
Yes.
So
Wow.
It's always been with you.
Always, I guess. Yeah.
Now, what has been the greatest influence on you as a writer and or on your writing?
I don't know, like I don't want to say like a built-in test pool or a built-in audience, but just the fact that I work with children. In particular, for the last 9 years, I've been working with gifted children. Now, all children say the darndest things, and all children really have a way of observing the world and just making it really plain and matter of fact, So I just feel like being able to work with children, it just gives me such an insight, such a lens into how children think that I can almost use them as inspiration every single day.
Well, so you talk about inspiration. So what do you think it is that inspires the next generation of writers?
I think the next generation of writers are inspired by the world around them, pretty much just like every other writer. They look at how the world is changing. They try to figure out their place in it. Like when I look at the students around me and the kids who live in my house, and I see how they're influenced by social media in good ways and in bad, it just makes them find their place in, okay, this is what I accept. This is what I see. This is what I want to change. This is what I want to share. So I just feel like as long as there is life and the world keeps turning, there will always be stories to be told, as long as people are observant enough to notice the things that are happening around them.
Lisa, it has been a pleasure having you join us here today, talking with you about your amazing book, There's a Bee in My Book Bag, A Tale of Two Sides, but just reconnecting with you and hearing about your experiences and the things that inspired you as a young person to write and to read and transition that into how you teach students, and now writing a book that teaches students in a different way. So thank you so much for joining us, Lisa.
Zinzi, thank you so much for doing this. I am so super proud of you. I feel like just even with the book, you had a thought about doing a podcast, and look at you making it happen. So here's to you for making it happen. I'm super proud of you, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being our first guest. So deciding to do this podcast took some time. It's been planned I've been considering it for a while, but you and I had a conversation. It was like 2.5 weeks ago. We were just chatting about your book. And I said, you know what? I should do a podcast where we talk to Black children's authors. And I told you, I said it, and you probably thought that it was just going to rest right there. And then I texted you about 1.5 weeks later and I said, Lisa, I need to talk to you. And here we are from that conversation. So the conversation with you, Lisa, really sparked it. Thank you for helping to push and get us to where we needed to be, that we now have a podcast to share with other people. I absolutely believe that it's important for children to hear different stories. They need to hear about different experiences. And it's also about hearing from those authors, because talking about your book to someone else, it not only provides insight and clarity, but it also leaves people with inspiration. There is a parent out there right now that's listening to our podcast and thinking about, well, I have a child who really likes bugs, and may creep me out, but hey, but this child now reads a story about the bug's perspective in this particular book. And that gives that child some inspiration. I guess that child some insight. This is also another book that parents can add to their bookshelves. We wanted to do this podcast with books that I call bookshelf gems, because these are books that everyone may not know about yet, because these are the books that are out there by up and coming authors, some of the self-published authors that have books that you may know about in your hometown or in your school, but someone else may not know about it. So I want to make sure that other people know about the books by people like Lisa Martin-Suber and the authors that we're going to feature on our podcast.
Yes. And on behalf of self-published authors everywhere, we thank you for giving us this platform, because it is not easy. The publishing part of it is easy, but the getting the book out there, the marketing, the, letting people know, that's kind of a hurdle. But thank you for being, I guess, a beacon of light for us so we can shine our books.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us. We had a wonderful time talking with Lisa Martin-Suber, the author of There's a Bee in My Book Bag. Be sure to check out her book on Amazon.com and Lulu.com. Be sure to join us next week as we engage you with another wonderful reader sharing their story of characters of color and of diversity. This has been authored by us. I'm your host, Zenzi Hodge. Thank you for joining us, and happy reading. Before we close, I'd like to dedicate this first episode of Authored by Us podcast to the late Clark Garrison. Clark Garrison was the CEO of the Survival Radio Network and host of the show, The Conversation. He was also a beloved rattler from Florida A&M University. I met him in 2014 when he invited me on his show to interview me about my book For the Never Snowy Christmas. Clark didn't know who I was. We never met at FAMU, and we never met in the years since. But he knew one thing, that I was a fellow rattler, and I had a project, I had a book that needed to be shared. So he created a space for me to be a guest on his show. That was the most humbling thing, and I always appreciated it. About a year later, he started teaching what would be called an early master class on Periscope about how to host a radio show and how to do podcasts and video shows. And I took one of his classes, and he shared with his audience about just taking the step, having an idea and having the courage to go forward and sharing your story with other people. And it was that day I decided I wanted to do a podcast. I didn't know what the podcast would be about. I didn't know how I would podcast and where it would go. But in that moment, in that class with Clark Garrison, it planted an idea, planted a seed that took us to where we are today, producing Authored by Us. So I dedicate this show to the vision, the dedication, and the memory of Clark Garrison for wanting to create a place for all people to share their creativity and leaving a legacy of commitment to developing a next generation. Thank you, Clark. I appreciate all that you've done.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Authored by Us. Every author has a story to tell, and we enjoy bringing their stories to you each week. Whether you are listening as a young reader or are sharing this podcast with the young readers in your life, we are delighted to celebrate these stories inspired by diversity and shared in the voice of their authors. Follow us on social media at Authored by Us and subscribe to our podcast using your favorite podcast app. That way you never miss an episode. Have a gem on your bookshelf that we should have on ours? Visit us online at authoredbyus.com and let us know. Until next time, happy reading.